Imagine standing in a crowd of thousands, cheering, clapping, eyes wide with unthinking admiration, yet feeling utterly alone. Not because you're invisible, but because you see. You see the hollowness behind the performance, the absurdity of the rituals, the blind worship of mediocrity dressed in glitter. You ask yourself, have I gone mad? Or has the world? This is not a dream. It is the daily, disorienting experience of the sensitive, thinking individual trapped in a world that has normalized dysfunction. A world where to conform is considered virtuous and to question is considered dangerous. Here, the price of awareness is alienation. To possess a beautiful mind in a sick society is to suffer in paradox. It is to be lucid in a collective hallucination. It is to be a candle in a hurricane, burning bright with insight, but threatened at every moment by the chaos around it. The sickness of our society is not a metaphor, it is real, and the symptoms are everywhere. The glorification of consumerism over character, the seduction of shallow fame over authentic meaning, the anesthetizing of discomfort rather than the exploration of its root. We reward obedience over wisdom, distraction over depth, and conformity over creativity. Children are drugged into docility. Artists are told to be marketable. Philosophers are silenced by noise. The metrics of success are profit, visibility, and applause, not virtue, understanding, or beauty. In such a system, a truly awake mind becomes a threat. The dissonance is unbearable. You begin to wonder if something is wrong with you. The world seems to function. People go to work, pay bills, laugh at sitcoms, but something inside you screams, this isn't living. This is surviving. This is sleepwalking. There is an ancient anguish that stirs in those who feel this. It is not new. It is the pain of Socrates, condemned for corrupting the youth by teaching them to think. It is the pain of Nietzsche, who wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how, yet struggled to find a society that even allowed one to ask why." The beautiful mind, in its essence, is a seeker of truth. And truth, in a society built on illusion, is exiled. But what does it mean to be beautiful in mind? It is not intelligence in the academic sense. It is not having information. It is the capacity for inner vision, the ability to wrestle with the existential, to feel deeply, to question courageously, to synthesize meaning from chaos. It is the rare combination of emotional sensitivity and philosophical insight. Such a mind becomes both mirror and torch, reflecting the sickness of society while illuminating possible escape routes. Yet, society does not thank such minds. It resents them because they reveal the cracks in the mask. They force confrontation, and nothing is more terrifying to a system built on denial than the truth. This alienation, however, is not a failure, it is a calling. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also warned that this journey often isolates the individual from the collective. Individuation, the unfolding of one's authentic self, demands breaking away from the herd, and the herd punishes those who leave. So, the question becomes, how do you survive with a beautiful mind in a society that is pathologically sick? More than survive, how do you live, thrive, create, and heal when the very air around you is laced with denial? To answer that, we must first dive deeper into the architecture of our culture's madness. We must dissect its rituals, expose its myths, and understand how sickness became the norm. Only then can we begin to explore what a sane mind might look like within an insane world. Let us step further into the shadow, not to be lost in it, but to understand it. For only by knowing the sickness can we begin to protect and liberate the beautiful mind. The sickness of a society does not erupt overnight. It is not a sudden collapse, but a slow, insidious corrosion, like rust eating through the soul of a structure. And when the rot is everywhere, when every wall leans just slightly off-center, when the floor buckles beneath our feet and the ceiling dips in quiet surrender, madness begins to look like architecture. We call it culture. To truly understand what it means to possess a beautiful mind in a sick society, we must unearth the blueprints of that society. Strip away its cosmetic illusions and peer into the raw mechanics of its values, institutions, and narratives. And what we find is deeply unsettling. Our civilization worships productivity while starving meaning. From the moment we are born, we are measured by grades, by test scores, by bank balances, by follower counts. Success is not defined by who we are, but by what we produce and how efficiently we fit into the machinery. The human soul becomes data. Inner richness is exchanged for outer performance. Think of our education systems, not as sanctuaries of wisdom, but factories of obedience. Children are taught what to think, not how to think. Creativity is sacrificed on the altar of standardization. The question, "Who am I?" is never asked, only, "How do I score?" And those who cannot conform to the system's narrow metrics are labeled defective, disordered, problematic, when in truth they may be the most awake. The economic machine is no different. It reduces human potential to marketable utility. It demands we define our worth by our labor output, our professional identity, our ability to consume. Even our relationships are commodified. Love becomes transaction. Connection becomes content. And in this transactional wasteland, loneliness explodes, not for lack of people, but for lack of authenticity. In such a society, alienation is not an anomaly. It is systemic. The philosopher Eric Fromm once wrote, "The sick individual finds himself at home with all the others who suffer from the same deformation. In fact, it is the fully sane person who feels isolated." This is the true madness. A culture so inverted that sickness masquerades as health, and sanity is punished as deviance. The media feeds this pathology relentlessly. It manufactures anxiety, distraction, and discontent, because an unsettled mind is a pliable consumer. A person who feels whole has no need to buy their wholeness. But one who is starved of inner truth can be sold 1,000 substitutes. And so, the beautiful mind, self-reflective, questioning, yearning for truth, becomes the enemy of the market. This inversion seeps into morality as well. We celebrate narcissism and call it confidence. We celebrate cruelty and call it strength. Empathy is dismissed as weakness, humility as failure. We mistake spectacle for virtue. Our icons are not sages but celebrities, their influence measured in impressions rather than depth of character. We crave visibility, not understanding. And then we wonder why depression spreads like wildfire, why anxiety is the new baseline, why addiction is not the exception but the norm. These are not merely individual afflictions. They are symptoms of a system that has exiled the soul. As Aldous Huxley observed, the real hopeless victims of mental illness are to be found among those who appear to be most normal. They are normal not in what may be called the absolute sense of the word. They are normal only in relation to a profoundly abnormal society. So what becomes of the beautiful mind in such a landscape? It suffers, but it also sees. And that vision, that unbearable clarity, is both its torment and its potential salvation. The question is no longer simply how to survive, but how to remain intact in a society designed to fragment us. How to reclaim meaning when language has been hollowed. How to find wholeness in a world built on fracture. These are not easy answers, but they begin with recognizing that what the world calls normal may be the greatest danger of all. To move forward, we must explore the intimate suffering of those who feel this dissonance most sharply. The beautiful minds who carry this pain not as pathology, but as a mirror to the age. For in their suffering lies a crucial message, a buried wisdom that our culture desperately needs, yet ruthlessly silences. There is a peculiar kind of suffering that comes not from trauma, nor tragedy, but from awareness itself. A silent ache that takes root the moment you begin to see too clearly. You see the lies that others call truth, the emptiness beneath societal rituals, the quiet desperation behind forced smiles. You see people living lives not of their own choosing, driven by inertia, fear, or illusion. And you wonder, why doesn't it break them like it breaks me? To see through the veil is to lose the comfort of it. Most people live in a kind of trance, half awake, distracted enough to avoid the horror of their disconnection. But the beautiful mind, sensitive, intuitive, psychologically porous, cannot sustain that trance. It notices everything. The subtle contradiction, the unspoken pain, the falseness in a handshake, the deadness behind ambition. This sensitivity is not a defect. It is the beginning of depth. But in a sick society, it becomes a curse. Consider the existential weight carried by those who feel too much and think too deeply. The world tells them to toughen up, to let it go, to just be happy. But how can you be happy when you see meaning hemorrhaging from every corner of culture? When you hear the silent screams buried beneath the noise of entertainment? When you feel the pulse of a dying world in the quiet moments of stillness? Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who endured the unspeakable horrors of Auschwitz, once wrote, "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. Yet modern psychiatry often pathologizes those who react deeply to an insane world. Depression, anxiety, existential dread. These are frequently framed as individual malfunctions, rather than as appropriate responses to a society devoid of soul. What if the mind is not broken, but responding honestly to a broken world?" This question challenges everything. It reframes suffering not as disorder but as awareness. And in doing so, it points to a vital truth. The pain of a beautiful mind is often evidence of its integrity. It refuses to anesthetize itself. It refuses to pretend. It carries its despair like a wound that must be honored, not medicated away, but understood. But such honesty is isolating. When your pain is dismissed as overthinking or negativity, you begin to doubt yourself. You feel like an exile, a ghost wandering through a culture that does not speak your language. You long for connection, for someone who feels it too. But more often than not, you are met with silence or worse, platitudes. This isolation can spiral into nihilism. When the world feels unreal, and no one seems to care, hope itself begins to fracture. Jean-Paul Sartre captured this terror when he wrote, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." But how does one make a self when every path is saturated with artificiality? How do you craft authenticity in a culture that rewards only masks? Here lies the paradox. The very mind that suffers most under the weight of awareness is also the mind most capable of transformation. Within its ache is a flame, a longing for something true, something sacred, something whole. That longing is not a flaw. It is a compass. The pain, then, is a calling. Not to retreat, but to transmute. Not to numb, but to deepen. Awareness must be paired with courage. The beautiful mind must not merely survive the sickness. It must resist it, outgrow it, transform it. And that begins with reclaiming one's suffering as meaningful. Arthur Schopenhauer, often labeled a pessimist, understood this all too well. He said, "Compassion is the basis of morality." And perhaps compassion begins within, recognizing that our suffering is not shameful, but sacred. It signals that we have not gone blind, that we still care, that we have not given up on truth, even when the world has. But compassion must be active. It must move beyond introspection. It must become creation. It must become rebellion. Because the next step in the journey is not merely understanding the sickness, but finding the strength to build beauty in spite of it. There comes a moment in every beautiful mind's journey when suffering becomes unbearable. Not because the pain intensifies, but because it stagnates. Insight alone is not enough. Awareness without action curdles into despair. And so, the awakened mind, exhausted from the weight of seeing, must choose to retreat into numbness or to create as a form of rebellion. In a sick society, creation is not just expression, it is resistance. It is an act of reclaiming the sacred in a world that profits from the profane. To create is to say, "You will not steal my soul. You will not define me by your systems. I am not a machine. I am alive." And in that declaration, something begins to shift, not just within the individual, but within the world itself. The culture around us commodifies everything. Art becomes product. Language becomes branding. Even spirituality is packaged and sold in influencer-ready formats. But true creation, honest, raw, unfiltered, defies commodification. It is not made for consumption, but for communion. It is the language of the soul, speaking in symbols when words fail. And perhaps this is the most radical thing the beautiful mind can do: create meaning in a meaningless world. not adopt someone else's narrative, but forge one from the raw elements of its own truth. This act is not egoic. It is existential. As Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos is the suffering. The star is the creation. The bridge between them is courage. Creation, in this sense, is not limited to the arts. It includes the way we think, speak, love, and live. A conversation can be a form of creation. A refusal to follow the script can be revolutionary. Even kindness in a cruel world is a kind of artistry, fragile, deliberate, and deeply subversive. To create is to engage in an alchemical process, turning pain into beauty, confusion into insight, silence into song. It is not about erasing the wound, but weaving it into something useful, even holy. This is where the beautiful mind transcends victimhood. It ceases to merely suffer in society and begins to shape a response to it. But such creation requires solitude. In the noise of the collective, the authentic voice is hard to hear. The beautiful mind often finds itself withdrawing, not out of weakness but necessity. Solitude is the crucible where authenticity is forged. The thinker, the artist, the healer, all must step outside the mainstream long enough to hear their inner voice. And when they return, they bring gifts the world didn't know it needed. Still, this path is not glamorous. It is lonely. It is often unrewarded. The world rarely applauds what it cannot monetize. But applause is not the point. The point is to remain whole, to remain human, and sometimes to create even when no one is watching. Consider the mystics, the poets, the philosophers, the ones history calls ahead of their time. They were not applauded in their own age. Many were silenced, ridiculed, even destroyed. But they created anyway, because what flowed through them could not be suppressed. Because their rebellion was not political but spiritual. Because they were not trying to fix the world, they were trying to remember themselves. And perhaps that's the highest purpose of the beautiful mind in a sick society. Not to win, but to witness. To show, simply by existing, that another way is possible. That thought can be deep. That beauty can be real. That love can be true. That meaning can still be made even in the ruins. Jean Cocteau once wrote, "Art is a wound turned into light, and the beautiful mind, scarred by clarity, becomes a lantern. Not to illuminate the entire world at once, but to offer just enough light for another mind to find its way." Now the question deepens. What does it mean to live authentically in defiance of illusion? Not just to create, but to embody that creation, to become what the world forgets. And in that becoming, to begin healing not just the self, but the world around you. To live authentically in a world addicted to illusion is to bear a subtle kind of exile. You are both within society and yet not truly of it. You walk its streets, speak its language, follow its laws. But beneath the surface, you are always resisting, always translating, always holding back. Because you've seen too much. Because you can no longer pretend. Authenticity is often romanticized, spoken of in self-help mantras and Instagram captions. But in truth, it is brutal. It costs everything that is false within you, and often much of what is familiar. It means risking rejection for the sake of truth. It means losing belonging in order to find integrity. It means speaking when silence is safer, and staying silent when noise would win approval. It is not comfort, it is clarity. And clarity is lonely. In a sick society, the authentic individual becomes a stranger. People don't trust what they cannot categorize. If you are not selling, not signaling, not posturing, then what are you doing? The question comes laced with suspicion. The beautiful mind that dares to live honestly becomes unsettling to those still cloaked in roles. You remind them, without trying, that they, too, once dreamed before they surrendered. That they once asked questions before they were taught to fear the answers. Jean-Paul Sartre called this the nausea of freedom. That dizzying, terrifying realization that you are radically responsible for your own existence. Man is condemned to be free, he wrote, because once thrown into the world, he is responsible for everything he does. The beautiful mind cannot hide in convention. Its awareness makes it accountable. It must choose again and again to be real, even when the cost is unbearable. But the burden is not just social. It is internal. Authenticity demands that you look your own contradictions in the face, that you stop blaming society for everything and begin taking ownership of your own shadow. A beautiful mind is not an innocent one. It too has been shaped by the sickness it resists. It too has been tempted by conformity, seduced by apathy, numbed by despair. Authenticity means confronting that without flinching. This is the most painful part of the journey, when you can no longer blame the world for your suffering. When you realize that integrity means giving up the fantasy of being misunderstood, of being the tragic exception. The truly authentic life is not a performance. It is a relentless mirror. It humbles you. It exposes the ego's clever disguises. It demands not perfection, but truthfulness. And here, paradoxically, is where freedom begins. Not in detaching from the world, but in returning to it undefended. In letting yourself be seen, not as an image, but as a human being. Fallible, unfinished, sincere. It is terrifying, but it is also the first real breath you've taken in years. This kind of living becomes a quiet revolution. You stop chasing validation. You stop contorting yourself into shapes that fit systems you no longer believe in. You begin to build your life around truth, not around safety. And though you lose many things, approval, status, even relationships, you gain something irreplaceable. Inner peace. The world may never understand this path. It may mock you, pathologize you, ignore you, but you will understand it. And that understanding will become your compass. As Thomas Merton once said, "We are not at peace with others because we are not at peace with ourselves, and we are not at peace with ourselves because we are not at peace with God." Whether or not you believe in God, the message is clear. Peace is born of integrity, and integrity is born of courage. To live authentically is to live without guarantees, but it is also to live without regret, because at last your life becomes your own, not a reaction, not a disguise, but a creation, a lived truth. The final question now emerges, not how to survive with a beautiful mind in a sick society, but how to heal both. Not to escape the world, but to engage it, to bring your clarity to the collective, to become not just a witness, but a source of restoration. What if your suffering was never a flaw, but a forge? What if the pain of perceiving too much, feeling too deeply, thinking too wildly, was not a sentence to isolation, but an initiation into a deeper calling? The beautiful mind, wounded by clarity, burdened by truth, and haunted by authenticity, is not merely here to endure the sickness of society. It is here to transform it. Healing does not mean fixing the world with force. It means becoming a living example of what a sane, soulful, and courageous life might look like. In a world addicted to image, the most radical act is to live from essence, to be whole in a culture that fragments, to love in a culture that exploits, to speak honestly in a culture of spectacle. These are not small gestures. They are revolutionary, but healing begins within. Before the beautiful mind can heal the world, it must tend to itself, not as a narcissistic retreat, but as sacred preparation. Because truth, ungrounded in love, becomes cruelty, and clarity, untempered by compassion, becomes despair. The beautiful mind must learn to hold its own contradictions. Grief and gratitude, anger and awe, disillusionment and wonder. This is not easy. The temptation to collapse into bitterness is strong. When you've seen the depth of the world's apathy and artifice, it's easy to believe that nothing matters. But that belief is a trap. Healing is not about abandoning your sorrow. It's about giving it a home. It's about making room for beauty not despite your despair, but within it. As Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Perhaps everything terrible is in its deepest being something helpless that wants help from us." This includes our own wounds. This includes the wounds of the world. The beautiful mind does not destroy its pain, it befriends it. It listens, it learns, and in doing so, it discovers something extraordinary. The very things that once felt like curses, sensitivity, alienation, sorrow, become bridges. Bridges to empathy, to meaning, to others. For this is the final revelation. You are not alone. There are others, scattered across this fractured world like stars in a lightless sky. Other beautiful minds who have wrestled with the same darkness, who have refused to go numb, who have suffered in silence, thinking they were broken, when in truth they were becoming whole. To heal, then, is also to find each other, to gather not in masses, but in sacred connections, conversations that nourish the soul, friendships that refuse the shallow, communities that cherish truth more than comfort. In these spaces, healing accelerates. The beautiful mind no longer has to carry everything alone, can exhale, can be witnessed, can belong. From this place of inner wholeness and relational resonance, a new possibility emerges, the ability to serve, not as a savior, not with ego, but with humility and presence. The healed mind becomes a healer not by preaching but by being, by living the questions, by embodying what the culture has forgotten. Carl Jung believed that the fate of the world depended not on mass movements, but on the integrity of individuals. He wrote, "The salvation of the world consists in the salvation of the individual soul." This is the core truth. Systems do not change unless people do. And people do not change unless someone shows them that transformation is possible. So let this be the journey of the beautiful mind. To move from alienation to authenticity, from pain to creation, from clarity to compassion, and finally, from solitude to service. You were never broken. You were breaking open to something deeper, older, truer. In a sick society, the most urgent medicine is not more control, more conformity, more speed. It is consciousness. It is beauty. It is the courage to live a soul-centered life. You are not here to fit in. You are here to heal what others are too afraid to face. That is your madness. That is your gift. And in the end, perhaps they are the same thing.